History and archaeology are really about people. People who once lived and worked in the world we now live in. The landscape around us is full of the evidence of their lives. By learning to interpret that evidence, we can build up a picture of the kind of life they lived, from the recent past to that of our ancestors thousands of years ago. If you walk through any piece of English countryside and detect the evidence clearly, you may be able, in your imagination, to see the successive generations of people who once lived there. We're going to look at some of the kinds of evidence you can use to create this picture of the past, and some of the methods archaeologists and historians use to make sure their conclusions are as reliable as possible. You can play a part in that process. It has been estimated that over 80% of historical sites in Britain have yet to be looked at in close detail, and there will never be enough archaeologists and historians to look at each site. This means that with expert guidance, you can help with this search for evidence. By using your eyes and your intelligence, you might be able to provide that crucial clue, that final observation, that will make the jigsaw of the past come together to create a fuller picture. You can tell a lot about people from the homes they live in. Imagine, for instance, if we were to visit your home and observe it in detail like an historical site. What might an archaeologist make of your life from the physical evidence you've left behind? Archaeologists of the future will perhaps one day study these kinds of objects, looking for clues to the way people lived in the same way that today we take an interest in prehistoric and Saxon remains. Mick Aston is an archaeologist, and it's his job to interpret evidence, to search out the facts rather like a detective looking for clues. We asked him to take a close look at this strange tribe who just happened to be living in our own time.
And just coming in across the garden, all sorts of questions come up straight away. There's no gate across the front, there are merely low token walls at the front and small hedges along the side. That's because there are no animals here, it isn't a farm at all. We can see the building materials of the house, we can see that it's built of bricks, concrete, wood, it has a plastic porch with double glazing, rub around it and so on, and none of this is local materials, it all will be bought in. Well, the centre of any household, now or in the past, would have been the place where the food was prepared, and we've now come into the kitchen of the late 20th century house, and we can see a whole range of stuff around us where the family have literally just left in mid-breakfast by the look of it, pieces of toast and so on. Unlike in earlier times, the food is not produced on the site here, it's bought in. We've got bananas, for example, probably from the West Indies, oranges, very conveniently labelled from Israel, and apples, of course, which are not in season at this time of year. And this is telling us, as archaeologists at this time, that the people who live here are in contact with a very wide area. While they're out, let's look at their rubbish bin. Archaeologists love rubbish, and for example, if we look in here, there's a tea bag to start with. There's long-distance contact and a nice bit of high-tech wrapped up in a little bag there. We won't mess with that too much. But much more interesting in a way are the cans. We're all familiar with these little aluminium cans. It's extremely well made. It's made of a rather rare material, and yet it's thrown away. And that, I think, would tell an archaeologist a great deal about this society. The fact that it makes an expensive object, expensive to produce in terms of the aluminium, beautifully designed, beautiful technology, and yet it's thrown away. But we've seen, looking at the food, that nothing is produced on the site, and in fact if we look out in the garden we can see there's absolutely nothing at all to eat. There's lots of ornamental plants, there's lots of grass, but no animals eating it, and it's purely ornamental. We have water laid on, a pure water supply, not only cold water, but the great luxury of hot, warm water, and the whole thing plumbed in so that there are drains to carry away the waste water. The other basic activity is cooking, preparation of food, and we've got no evidence of here of wood or coal, but here we have an electric cooker run from electricity, the whole house wired up with sockets, very labour saving, very convenient, making it very easy to do all these jobs in and around the kitchen.
Whether people are living in the present or the distant past, there are certain basic requirements that have always been important to the business of living. Mick talked about evidence that can be put under headings of boundaries. We've always liked to make clear the edges of our property and to keep our animals in and other people's out. Shelter. We all need a roof over our heads. Food and water. We need to eat and drink and have the occasional bath. Fuel. If we don't keep warm in our climate, we won't last long. And just imagine eating uncooked food. Transport. People have always needed to get about somehow. These headings provide one way of looking at any human settlement. They're not the only ones, and you might like to make up your own list, but it gets us started in the process of categorising the evidence we find, while most of it is still left. One of the main problems with history is that the further back in time you go, the less evidence exists. Wood, metal, paper and bodies rot and eventually disappear. Most of what we've seen in this modern home will eventually decay. This farm was deserted only a short time ago, and already the process of time has begun to do its work. Although the ghosts of its occupants may still be around, the evidence of their lives has begun to disappear. Lugworthy Farm is just one of the many that have been deserted to make way for a new reservoir in the Rodeford Valley in Devon. The removal of the existing buildings prior to the flooding of the valley has given archaeologists, and us, a rare chance to discover how long people have been living in these kind of settlements, and to build up a picture of the valley's past. By taking part in this process, we will be helping to add to an aspect of ordinary everyday history about which we know surprisingly little.
Okay, now we've come to this old farm, and you can see that it's derelict. The roofs are falling in, and various walls are falling out. And I want you to look at what clues there are around you that tell us something about how these people would have lived.
Look at this lamp. Probably paraffin. Put the paraffin here and it burns off.
The process of closely observing the evidence in the present is followed by the children making deductions about the kind of life these people lived in the past.
It must have been quite a cold house. Yeah. Because it had no electric heating, just fires. Well, let's go and see what we can find upstairs.
Not to be returned copy, that looks interesting.
Must have been a clock. You can see the shape of it there. You can tell it's been here a long time. So many layers of wallpaper.
It's very common in olden times to have a pump outside the back door or sometimes in the kitchen, and you had to pump water up, probably from a well underneath. No nipping in the shower or hopping in the bath, it would have probably been a stand-up job in front of a bowl.
You can see all this soot going up. It must have been a massive fire. There must be another chimney in there, or it could just bake inside.
What are they?
They're collars. They go around your neck instead of a shirt.
Now, one of the things that archaeologists are always interested in is that stuff rots away. So that if you go in a house like this that hasn't been abandoned for very long, there's quite a lot of stuff that's already going mouldy, going rotten. And if we were to come back in 10 years' time, a lot of that would have gone to dust. And in fact, if you look at the wood on this, you'll see that it's actually very, very soft. You can almost brush it away in your hands. And if an archaeologist was to come along later on, he may have great difficulty in working out exactly what that was.
At other farm sites in the valley, the search is on for more evidence. Other archaeological skills are being used. Recording and measuring is now crucial, as the buildings will soon disappear. Photography and collection of finds, ensuring their exact locations are recorded, forms part of the work at this stage. These are essential skills that can be applied to any archaeological site.
One roundabout here. Let's do it on the posts. Okay.
The environment around the farm is also a source of evidence. In its own way, the landscape can provide as much information as an historic document or building. Objects like flints, dating back several thousand years to the valley's earliest inhabitants, may come to light during field walking.
That's a nice piece. That's called a core. It's the piece that they made all the other flakes off. That's where they actually worked.
Hedgerows may be one of the earliest features made by our ancestors, who used them as sources of fuel, food and fencing. In their follow-up work in the classroom, the children are applying other skills to their work in the valley. Scientific experiment, examination of objects, research and classification are part of this next stage.
Here's the trap we found.
Yeah.
This is a diagram of how it works. Sticks his foot in there and gets caught.
What we'll do is we'll put 100 grams in there and then weigh up 100 grams of cob. And we'll put it in the water and see how much is vegetation and how much is mud and dung and stones and stuff like that. Right? Put the smallest bit in first.
There's a horse out float.
Yep. Most of this is stone.
Stones and things are sinking.
Yeah.
Now the straw and also and things like that floating.
What do you think these stones are used for? Probably a shed or something.
In some cases, one particular piece of evidence can be taken from observation through research to construction.
Yeah. 2 meters 80.
Well, they look like saddle stones, which people used to use for storing their crops of cereal. On top of these saddle stones were placed these shoulders like that, which went down on the top of the stone, and then the wreck or stack could be built on top of that stone. We have some saddle stones here on the farm. I'll show them to you if you like. Shall we go?
Yeah. How many stones would they actually use to build the wreck?
I would think a minimum of 6. That would be the very smallest, but on most farms it would be much bigger than that according to the size of the farm and how big the farmer wanted to make the stack and also how he wanted to use it during the winter. And the stacks would be used from then until the next spring.
Interviewing people with specialised knowledge produces the kind of information which needs to be checked by reference to textbooks and other sources.
In this old engraving here, you can just make out the tiny saddle stones with the hay houses on top, which corn or grain was stored inside. It's a nice old engraving.
The pillars are made out of granite and the rings on the top were made of slate as well. And they put them on during the harvest when the hay and corn was coming in, and they'd put the rings on the top, and when they'd finished doing that they would lie logs across them, logs or big tall branches. They'd lie straight across the top of them, and when they had done that they would put smaller branches across the middle the opposite way, and they'd carry on doing that until there's a rack. And when they'd done that, they'd start stacking the hay or corn on the top. The reason for the pillars being high off the ground was so that If rats or any rodents try to run up, they'd get to the slate collar and they'd just fall off onto the ground again.
When surface evidence becomes less available, or when the clues at the site don't give a complete picture, archaeologists have other sources of information for building up our knowledge of the more recent past. Maps and a range of documents, from the 11th century Exon Doomsday to census returns, and the resources of the local history library, can be crucial in confirming deductions and completing missing aspects of the historical picture.
Here's an important one. It was Roger II. He was 51. And he was a farmer of 128 acres, born in Jermsweek.
Magnus is 52 and her daughter's 23.
We're all familiar with the Ordnance Survey map as a source of information.
This is the tide map for Jermsweek.
Earlier maps, like the tithe maps, indicate the extent of people's properties for taxation purposes. They can provide details of field names and ownership and indicate the boundaries between properties.
Individual plots have numbers, like number 603 there. And if you look in the apportionment, under number 603, you have orchard and house. So if you get any problems, just come and ask.
What about trying 640?
6040 watery plot and is arable and is owned by Thomas Hicks.
What about the occupier?
That was Thomas
Tithe maps often refer to previous owners of the land, whose gravestones can be found in the local parish churchyard. A visit here provides an opportunity to track down a particular name in a document, like a tithe map or a census return.
I found it. It's Roger Seckham, over here.
One of the farmers' names seen in the census returns of 1851 was Seckham. It may be possible to find his grave, but this is complicated by the use of a common Christian name, Roger, by generations of the same family.
Eastcott. Eastcott. We got Eastcott. I've seen Eastcott. Have we got
somewhere.
Eastcott?
No, we haven't.
I think it's true.
Yeah,
I think it's the wrong grave. It's the wrong grave. Why don't we go look somewhere else?
Yeah, okay.
Sacred to the memory of Roger Seckham. I found another Roger Seckham grave.
This one's spelt with a K and not a C.
Oh yeah.
And it's got an H in it instead of an OMB.
Of Seckham. That's spelt with a K as well.
What is it? It's Roger Seckham, or Seckham. Died 27th of June 1880.
Yeah, that must be right. Because he was 51 in 1851, so he must be 80 in 1880.
Yeah. So he's also the wife of Agnes.
Yeah, that fits.
So
that's
we'll
right.
call it.
Yeah, 1880.
Documentary clues may be the only evidence we have for a particular historical period. At Hennard, the surface evidence was just one derelict house, which may have been a mill, surrounded by fields with humps and ridges. The documents told a different story. In 1850, the census returns showed that over 30 people lived in the village, with 20 children leaving the valley each day for the local school. But it was the archaeologist's work that was to provide the main evidence. This turned out to be the lost 19th century village of Hennard Jefford.
We're actually now looking at the heart of the village, really. Up on the top we've got a building which we know from documents was called Bond's Tenement. If you look at the buildings carefully, you'll see that all the doorways are actually facing us. They're coming down, pointing out this way. That's because the very gravelly surface that you can see coming round here behind you is actually a street. What we see behind us is the biggest building that we found so far. It's really quite well preserved. If you look at the cobble surface with the slate in, there's not one cobble missing from there, and that's very unusual. Normally buildings are disturbed by pits or they're disturbed by cellars, but because this is such a rural site, we're finding that the buildings are quite well preserved.
What things are you hoping to find to tell you about the people that lived here?
We'll find odd coins, we'll find bits of leather, bits of clothing, shoes perhaps. This site is really a site that was lived in by very poor people, so it's quite unlikely we'll find gold sovereigns and treasures and things like this. But we'll find out a lot of basic items to tell us about their lifestyle.
Archaeological information is really important because so little is known about the lifestyle of ordinary people, as opposed to the well-documented history of kings, queens, governments and battles.
At the site we've had some coins. I'll take these out and you can have a quick look at the coins. We found that coin underneath a lot of demolished cob, and the coin was lying on the floor of one of the houses. So we know that those houses must have been going out of use between 1816 and also 1866, when we found another coin in one of the other houses.
To an archaeologist, where an object is found is as important as what the object is. A dateable piece of evidence, like a coin or a distinctive piece of pot, will help to date other objects found nearby.
We found the main buildings. We can work out roughly how many people lived here at any one time. And we've also excavated the main building of the site, which is the mill.
The main wheel pit, water channels and a section of wooden water wheel were found on the site. And part of a millstone was discovered in a cottage floor. This mill, which documents date back to the 13th century, would have been the main centre of the valley for grinding corn, using the water power of the River Wolf. The accumulation of the evidence, the observation of the surface remains, research into documents, excavation and assessment of the material found on site, can gradually begin to build a picture of the past. That picture is rarely complete for all historical periods, but at Hennard, enough evidence survived of the bustling 18th century village with its own mill to enable archaeologists to get near to what it might have looked like.
Okay, let's start with the overall plan of the village, which is based on the actual excavation evidence.
Right, so we can refer that back to the aerial photograph, which shows the house platforms.
These post holes show that there was a lean-to building attached to the main house.
Supported by posts?
Yes, 4 or 5 timber posts holding up.
Thatched roof?
Yes, probably a thatched roof like the rest of the main part of the house. You can see clearly where the fireplace was here in the end wall of the building, and you would have had a chimney stack projecting up on the outside wall there.
Does that look right? Yeah, it looks fine. What about the hole?
An imaginative response to the past, based on research and observation, can produce a wide range of possibilities.
The walls were damp and wet slime ran down them. There was a cold floor, cobbled to stand on, and we had old sacks on the floor with hay underneath to sleep on.
These responses have been based on work done in the valley, and it's here, by using our imagination, that we can begin to understand the past at another level.
Bustling. Mill wheel groaning.
Horses pulling the plough.
Countryside plentiful and still. Birds sing. And today, glaring sun and dust. Wind rustling through the trees. Crackling of the tools on the cobble.
Wheelbarrow bumping over the mill.
Little left but river-washed cobbles. And tomorrow, sunlight on the water. Fish rippling the surface. Wind whispering through the reeds. Everything swamped in water. Nothing left.
to build up as complete a picture of the past as we can with the present. But you may have realised how by applying some of the basic skills of archaeology to the evidence available, you can begin to imagine what life was like for some of our distant ancestors. The techniques we've been seeing can be applied to any historical period or location. The activities shown in this video rely on the use of sound methods and organisation. It's important to remember that fieldwork must be done in cooperation with local archaeologists or historians. With their help, and using the skills we've seen, you too can begin to unlock the evidence of our ancestors' lives.